You just answered a text in 4 seconds. You just clicked buy now without reading the description. You just said yes to a favor you didn't have time for. And somewhere underneath all of that speed, a small voice already knows you're going to regret at least one of those choices by tonight. But the real reason has nothing to do with being busy or distracted or bad with money. It has to do with a habit almost nobody names, because on the surface it looks like the opposite of a habit at all. The rich make decisions slower than you, not lazier, not more hesitant, slower on purpose. While you're firing off replies and answers in seconds, the wealthiest people you've ever heard of are doing something that looks from the outside almost boring. They're pausing, they're waiting. They're letting a decision sit there, unanswered, for far longer than feels comfortable. And that pause is not a personality quirk. It's a system built quietly and deliberately to protect them from the exact kind of decision you just made in 4 seconds. Here's what's actually happening in your mind when you decide fast. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying 2 different modes of thinking inside every human brain. He called them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is instant. It's automatic. It's the part of you that answers a text before you've even processed what it says. System 2 is slow. It's effortful. It's the part of you that actually weighs a decision instead of just reacting to it. And here's the part that should bother you a little. System 1 runs the show almost all day, every day, for almost everyone. Not because people are careless, because System 2 is expensive. It takes energy your brain would rather save. So your brain, by default, tries to skip it. It reaches for the fast answer, the fast purchase, the fast yes, because fast feels efficient, but fast isn't free. It just hides its cost until later. Now think about how differently that plays out for someone managing real wealth. Warren Buffett has said in more than one interview that he can go years without making a major investment decision. Years. Not because he's indecisive, because he is deliberately refusing to let System 1 anywhere near decisions that matter. His longtime business partner, Charlie Munger, built an entire philosophy around this exact idea, famously describing most of investing as sitting still and doing absolutely nothing until the right decision becomes obvious. Not busy, not reactive. Waiting. Doesn't that feel backwards? You'd think the people managing the most money would be the ones making the most decisions. But it's the opposite. The more is at stake, the slower the decision gets. And that single reversal is the entire secret hiding inside this video. Here's the deeper mechanism behind it. Economist Herbert Simon, who won a Nobel Prize for his work on decision-making, introduced a concept called satisficing. Most people, most of the time, don't actually search for the best possible decision. They search only until they find one that feels good enough, and then they stop looking because the search itself feels uncomfortable. That's why you clicked buy now without reading the description. Good enough arrived and your brain grabbed it before it could second guess itself. But satisficing has a cost that compounds. One good enough decision barely matters. 1,000 good enough decisions stacked over a decade quietly become the entire shape of your financial life. Small impulsive yeses, small unread contracts, small purchases made to end the discomfort of deciding rather than to actually get what you wanted. None of them feel dangerous in the moment. That's exactly what makes them dangerous. So what replaces satisficing if the wealthy aren't doing it? A delay, a deliberate, almost uncomfortable delay, inserted on purpose between the moment a decision appears and the moment it gets made. Behavioral economist Richard Thaler, who also won a Nobel Prize for his work on how humans actually behave with money instead of how textbooks assume they behave, showed something striking. When people are forced to wait even a short amount of time before a purchase or a financial choice, the emotional pull behind that choice weakens dramatically. The urgency you feel right now is not information, it's chemistry. It fades. And once it fades, the decision usually looks completely different than it did in the heat of the moment. This is the counterintuitive twist most people never see coming. You assume urgency means something important is happening. You assume the tightness in your chest when you're about to say yes is your gut telling you the truth. But that tightness is usually just adrenaline, dressed up as instinct. The rich have learned, often the hard way, that urgency is the least trustworthy feeling in any decision involving money. So instead of trusting it, they wait it out. They let the chemical spike pass, and only then do they let the decision get made. Angela Duckworth, the psychologist known for her research on grit and long-term achievement, found something similar in a different context. The people who sustained success over years weren't the ones with the fastest reflexes or the sharpest instincts. They were the ones who could tolerate discomfort long enough to make a considered choice instead of an emotional one. Grit, in her research, wasn't about intensity. It was about patience under pressure, which sounds almost too simple to be the difference between 2 completely different financial lives. And yet, here we are. Now bring this back to you, not to someone abstract, to your actual week, the impulsive purchase you almost regretted the second you closed the app, the favor you agreed to before you'd even calculated what it would cost you in time, the fast yes to a subscription, a loan, a limited time only offer that magically stopped being limited when you looked again 3 days later. Every one of those moments had a pause available to you. A 5-minute pause, a one-night pause, and in almost every case, you skipped it because skipping it felt like efficiency, when really it was just System 1 taking the wheel again. Here's the uncomfortable question underneath all of this. What if the difference between where you are financially and where you want to be isn't intelligence? What if it isn't income, or luck, or timing the market? What if it's simply this? How long you're willing to let a decision sit before you make it? Because the wealthy aren't smarter in the moment. They're just more suspicious of the moment. They've learned that the version of them who wants to decide right now is rarely the version who should be deciding at all. So they build friction on purpose, a cooling off period before a big purchase, a rule to sleep on any decision over a certain dollar amount, a default habit of saying, let me think about it, even when part of them already wants to say yes. Not because they're cautious people by nature, but because caution, applied consistently, quietly outperforms speed almost every single time. Think for a second about how differently this shows up in everyday life, once you actually start looking for it. 2 people get the exact same email, a limited time investment opportunity, a friend pitching a business idea over coffee, a flashy new gadget with a countdown timer ticking on the screen. The first person feels the pull and answers inside the pull while the excitement is still loud. The second person feels the exact same pull, notices it, and simply doesn't answer yet. Same information, same temptation. Completely different outcome, 10 years later, not because one of them was smarter, but because one of them built a habit the other never even knew existed. There's a version of this playing out in your kitchen too, if you think about it. The person who grabs whatever's fastest to eat when they're hungry, and the person who has already decided in advance what they'll eat, long before hunger shows up to hijack the decision. Nutrition researchers have found the same pattern behavioral economists find in money. Decisions made in a hot, emotional state are consistently worse than decisions made in a cool, calm state, and almost nobody is naturally cool when the moment actually arrives. The people who seem to have discipline in the moment usually don't. They just made the real decision earlier, back when they weren't hungry, weren't rushed, weren't feeling the pull at all. That's the quiet trick hiding underneath almost every disciplined person you've ever admired. They're not resisting temptation in real time, using willpower the way it looks from the outside. They already decided before temptation showed up. The decision isn't happening in the moment anymore. It happened earlier, in a cooler, quieter moment, and by the time the urgency arrives, there's nothing left to decide. There's only a rule to follow. Consider what this looks like with money specifically. Someone with a spending rule doesn't stand in front of a limited time offer wrestling with whether to buy it. They already decided weeks ago that any purchase over a certain amount gets a 48-hour delay. No exceptions, no matter how good the deal looks. So the countdown timer on the screen, the one specifically designed to trigger your System 1, doesn't even reach them. The rule already answered the question before the temptation had a chance to ask it. This is why watching a wealthy household spend money can look almost anticlimactic. No dramatic willpower battles, no visible struggle. Just a quiet, boring consistency? Because the hard part already happened, earlier, somewhere you didn't see it. You can ask yourself right now, honestly, how many of your last 10 financial decisions were made in that cool, earlier state versus how many were made in the heat of the actual moment. For most people, the answer is uncomfortable. Almost every decision gets made hot. Almost none get made cool. And that single imbalance, repeated for years, is often the real difference between 2 people with the exact same income ending up in 2 completely different financial positions by the time they're 40. You can build the same friction starting today, and it costs nothing. The next time you feel that pull to decide right now, notice it. Don't obey it, and don't fight it either. Just name it. Say to yourself, this is urgency, not information. Then give the decision the smallest possible delay you can tolerate. An hour, a night, a single walk around the block before you answer. It will feel unnatural at first, almost inefficient, exactly the way it feels unnatural to a beginner every single time they try to slow something their body wants to rush. But that discomfort is the entire mechanism. It's the same discomfort Buffett sits inside for years at a time. The same discomfort Munger built a philosophy around. The same discomfort that separates a good enough decision from an actually good one. You didn't answer that text in 4 seconds because you're careless. You answered it in 4 seconds because nobody ever taught you that the 4 seconds themselves were the problem. Tonight, you'll check your bank account again, the same way you always do. But this time, before you decide anything else, you'll remember the one thing the richest people you've ever heard of already know. It was never about deciding faster. It was always about deciding slower, on purpose, until slow became the only speed that made sense.